Joining us now on the line, Robert Costa with the Washington Post. Good day to talk about politics. And the big news yesterday, well, I don't know how big it really is. I mean, it's like if a tree falls in the forest but nobody hears it. Does it make a sound? If a candidate gets out of a race but the candidate really had no following, does it have any real impact? Robert Costa, we got Lindsey Graham out of the race yesterday. What does it mean?
It doesn't mean much. You're right in terms of the actual race. But it means a little bit in terms of the dynamics of the race. He's a mainstream Republican hawk. Whether John McCain goes to Rubio or Christie could have an impact on the New Hampshire contest. And overall, it's a sign that Donald Trump is just not slowing down. You go at him, you seem to fall away.
And you think that's what happened to Lindsey Graham?
I think what happened to Graham is he never caught fire. He never had the momentum on a certain issue. He wasn't even able to ride his key issue, national security, to the front of the pack. It's also a testament to the struggle of the undercard debate this cycle. He was never able to get on the main stage, and that's political death.
All right, so there is this thing called the South Carolina primary where, people pay great attention to what happens in South Carolina. Does he have an impact if he decides to back a certain candidate in that?
He does. I think not so much about his endorsement, but his organization is pretty good in South Carolina. Where his people go could help someone on the ground there. Whether his endorsement does anything, who knows?
What do you think that his thoughts were in going into the race? Do you think that he actually believed he was going to win, or do you think he was just trying to get a platform out there, maybe generate book sales, or maybe get better exposure? What do you think his actual agenda was? Because this was a huge forum of governors that have already dropped out of the race that had far more credentials in executive leadership than he had.
I've covered Senator Graham for years on Capitol Hill. And I respect him as a reporter to source in the sense that he wasn't doing this for book sales. He does believe firmly in his national security beliefs, but he was always a long shot. It was always going to be a difficult bid. I think he was running to make a point, to be part of the conversation, and maybe have a chance in a New Hampshire primary if everything went right, but it never did.
All right, let's turn our attention to what's going on right now in Iowa, because if you look at the numbers in the Republican side of the equation, what I find very interesting is that Ted Cruz is really starting to run away with it in Iowa. If he wins in Iowa and does a decent showing in New Hampshire, but it looks like Donald Trump is going to win New Hampshire, all things being as they are today, does Cruz become a more important factor in this race?
He already is a more important factor than he was a month ago. He's consolidating support in that conservative lane. And if Trump does win New Hampshire, and maybe Trump and Cruz go into South Carolina as the head-to-head front-runners, and they head into the March 1st primaries, perhaps the same. The question is not so much is Cruz going to lose Iowa. People think he's going to win it. It's can Trump win New Hampshire? And really, is this going to be a Trump-Cruz race, or can someone else be part of that pack, a Rubio or a Christie?
And what about Rubio? I mean, because there's a poll out that came out yesterday. I've seen another poll that sort of goes against it, but a poll came out yesterday saying that if you do head-to-head matchups between Hillary and all the Republicans, the one who would win, the only one who could win, would be Marco Rubio.
Marco Rubio is engineered politically for a general election contest against Secretary Clinton. But the biggest open question for Rubio is, where does he actually win? Where on the map does he get momentum early on? Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, these are all states where Rubio is far behind in the polls. He's more someone who's looking for a long haul, someone who could survive a primary contest because he's seen as electable and the right kind of profile for the general election.
Well, when we're looking at someone like Marco Rubio, what do you think that what do you think Hillary's going to attack him on? What is it where his weaknesses are? Is it that he's been out of the Senate for such a long period of time campaigning? Has he had any key legislation? Because, we know what the targets are with her. What are his weaknesses?
I think if it was a general election against Clinton, it would be more of a fundamental contrast with the former Secretary of State about youth and experience. She's been casting herself in each of these Democratic debates as a steady hand on national security. Rubio, who's a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, is trying to say he's just as ready as anyone. But he's in his 40s. She's been in politics much longer. That's the key difference.
Okay, a couple other things. On the Democratic side of the equation, I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps a lot of people are underestimating the real chances of one Bernie Sanders. He's within 5 points of her in Iowa, and he will carry New Hampshire, it appears today, pretty handily.
I think Sanders, politically speaking, is perhaps being underrated because he isn't getting much bounce right now in the polls, but he's still right there in the polls. Sanders has an impressive ground game. I've covered it up close. A lot of people, when they talk about the future of the Democratic Party, they want to see it move left, those in the rank and file, not move back toward a Clinton. And that sentiment is deep and it's real, and it could lift him.
Yeah, so, I mean, if say, for example, he all but ties Hillary in Iowa and then handily wins New Hampshire, how does that fundamentally change the nature of the race?
If Secretary Clinton can't get a victory early on, a convincing victory, this is going to be a longer race than her people would have wanted. And the thing about Sanders is he's not someone who's a regional candidate. He has a national base. He has people across the country volunteering for him. So if he could get that momentum, he would turn people on in the sense that he's been pretty quiet for a few months, but he would prove with an early victory or showing in Iowa, in New Hampshire, that this is going to be an actual race. This is going to be a coronation.
Well, finally, there's one other thing about Donald Trump that I find very interesting. There was a poll, or a bunch of pollsters got together, and they're trying to figure out this problem. Why is it that in online polls, Donald Trump does better with Republicans than he does when you actually have a human being asking the questions? And they said that we may be underestimating the amount of support there is for Donald Trump by about 9% when it comes to college-educated Republicans. Is it possible that Donald Trump has a higher level of support than we estimate simply because there are some people out there who will vote for him but don't want to admit publicly that they're going to vote for him?
It's hard to prove that. But let's say I've been thinking about this all year as a reporter. It could be very possible college-educated Republicans seem to be reluctant to even tell reporters and probably pollsters that they support Donald Trump. And if that is true, if people are reluctant to tell pollsters what they really think about Trump, that they like him, then we're looking at perhaps a shift in the Republican Party that, unlike anything we've ever seen in a Trump nomination, could very well be on the way.
Well, what about if he's what about all the people that aren't supporting him? Do you think they may not show up at the polls if he ends up being the nominee for the GOP?
That's the thing. Are the Trump voters as engaged as other voters? Most Trump voters I meet haven't voted in a while. They're not activists in the same way a Ted Cruz voter would be. Mm-hmm. And if Trump just can't get them to show up in the Iowa caucuses or at the New Hampshire primary, he could be someone who keeps winning national polls but doesn't actually win a state.
All right. Well, we got to leave it there. Robert Costa, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Robert.